June 20th, 1944. 6:47 p.m. Philippine Sea, 283 miles from Task Force 58. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alex Vraciu pulls his Grumman F6F Hellcat hard left, tracers from a zero cutting through the space his fighter occupied a heartbeat ago. His fuel gauge reads 75 gallons. Maybe. The gauge isn't always accurate, especially after violent maneuvers, but he knows the math. He launched 4 hours ago, flew nearly 300 miles to reach the Japanese mobile fleet, dropped his bomb on a carrier, shot down 6 Judy dive bombers in 8 minutes. And now he's dogfighting Zeeks as the sun drops toward the horizon. This should be impossible. Every calculation the Japanese made about American carrier fighters told them this moment couldn't happen. Their intelligence was good. They knew the F4F Wildcats' range. They'd fought Wildcats for 3 years across the Pacific. They understood the iron law of carrier aviation. Fuel capacity equals combat radius equals survival. An American fighter this far from its carrier should be running for home, not hunting. The Zero pilot pulling into Vraciu's 6 o'clock knows this. He's flown from carriers since 1942. He fought at Midway, at Guadalcanal, at Rabaul. He knows exactly how far American fighters can reach and still make it home. Except tonight, everything he knows is wrong. Vraciu rolls inverted, pulls through, and the Hellcats' 6 Browning 50s hammer out a 2-second burst. The Zero's wing route erupts in flames. 216 American aircraft are fighting and fleeing over the Philippine Sea tonight. 85 of them are Hellcats. Most have been airborne for over 4 hours. They're 300 miles from their carriers, and they're still fighting. The Japanese tactical doctrine, built on 3 years of combat experience and meticulous calculation, is shattering in real time, because the Americans brought a drop tank. November 1943, Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff Headquarters, Tokyo. Captain Takahashi Iyozo spreads reconnaissance photographs across the briefing table. Aerial shots of American carriers, Essex-class fleet carriers, Independence-class light carriers, all photographed by long-range scouts who barely made it back. The photos show aircraft parked on the flight decks. The intelligence section has identified them. SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, TBF Avenger torpedo planes, F6F Hellcat fighters. The Hellcat is new. First appeared in combat in August at Marcus Island. Bigger than the Wildcat, it's replacing, faster, better climb rate. But the critical question, the question that determines how the Imperial Navy positions its carriers, is range. How far can it fly? Commander Fuchida Mitsuo, operations officer and veteran of Pearl Harbor, does the calculation on a chalkboard. The fundamental equation of carrier warfare is brutal in its simplicity. Internal fuel capacity minus fuel consumption during transit minus fuel reserve for combat minus fuel required for return equals combat radius. There's no cheating the math. Physics doesn't care about courage or training or tactical brilliance. The Zero fighter carries 137 gallons internally. With an 87-gallon drop tank, total capacity reaches 224 gallons. At economical cruise settings, 210 knots indicated mixture leaned properly. The Sakai engine burns about 35 gallons per hour. That gives roughly 6 hours endurance, but endurance isn't combat radius. Takeoff burns fuel. Climbing to altitude burns more. Combat at maximum power setting devours it. And you need reserve. Running dry over the ocean means death. The practical combat radius for a Zero with drop tank, 500 miles from the carrier, maybe 550 under perfect conditions. They've proven this in combat from the Solomons to the Central Pacific. Fuchida writes the number on the board, underlines it twice. Now the American fighters. The F4F Wildcat carried 144 gallons with self-sealing tanks. Intelligence reports say some models carried 2 58-gallon wing tanks, total capacity 260 gallons. But the Pratt & Whitney R1830 engine was thirstier than the Zero's Sakai, and the Wildcat was heavier, less efficient. Combat radius 200 to 250 miles maximum. The Imperial Navy has 3 years of combat data confirming this. Coral Sea, May 1942. American fighters turned back before reaching the Japanese carriers. Midway, June 1942, Wildcat escorts couldn't cover the full strike mission. Santa Cruz, October 1942. American fighters appeared, struck, disappeared quickly. The pattern held across dozens of engagements. American fighters operated within a predictable envelope. They escorted strikes to about 200 miles, fought briefly, then headed home. They never loitered. They never had reserves for extended combat. This created the tactical foundation for Japanese carrier operations. Position your task force 250 to 300 miles from the enemy. At that distance, your strike aircraft can reach them, but their fighters cannot effectively reach you. They might arrive, but without fuel to fight properly. Easy kills for your own combat air patrol. Distance equals safety. Now this new Hellcat changes variables. Larger than the Wildcat, that suggests more internal fuel, more powerful engine. That suggests higher consumption. American manufacturing emphasizes strength and survivability over range. The intelligence assessment estimates the F6F carries approximately 200 gallons internally, possibly provisions for a belly tank, maybe 100 gallons. Total, 300 gallons. Combat radius estimate 300 miles maximum, closer to 250 miles practical. Fuchida circles the number. The staff officers nod. The math still favors distance. Keep the mobile fleet beyond 300 miles and the American fighters cannot reach you with enough fuel to fight. Not really fight. Not the way combat demands. Hard maneuvering, full power, multiple engagements. Vice Admiral Ozawa Jisaburo, commander of the mobile fleet, approves the tactical doctrine. His carriers will operate at the edge of American fighter range. His pilots will have the advantage of distance. The American carriers will be vulnerable. What the Japanese don't know, what their intelligence hasn't captured, is that the F6F3 doesn't carry 200 gallons internally. It carries 250, and the drop tank isn't 100 gallons, it's 150. That's 400 gallons total, nearly double the Wildcat's capacity, 78% more than their estimate. The math is about to betray them. February 1942, USS Lexington, Coral Sea. Lieutenant Commander Paul Ramsey leads his F4F3 Wildcat division away from the carrier. They're escorting a strike against Japanese shipping at Rabaul. The target lies 425 miles northwest. Ramsey checks his fuel gauge. His Wildcat carries 144 gallons in self-sealing tanks. No external tanks available. They're still being developed, tested, modified. He's burning fuel from the moment the right radial engine coughs to life. The math haunts every carrier fighter pilot. Take off and climb to 10,000 feet, 20 gallons. Cruise out to target at economical settings, 55 gallons per hour. Combat, if needed, 100 gallons per hour at full power. Return flight, another 55 gallons per hour. Landing pattern and reserve, 20 gallons minimum. The numbers never work in your favor. At 200 miles out, Ramsey makes the calculation. They've been airborne 90 minutes, used approximately 70 gallons. That leaves 74 gallons, barely enough to get home if they turn back immediately. The strike group continues toward Rabaul. The dive bombers and torpedo planes don't have to worry about escorting anyone. They just need to reach the target and get back. But the fighters have to maintain position with the bombers, which sometimes means racing ahead to intercept threats, then throttling back to rejoin. All of that burns extra fuel. At 240 miles, Ramsey makes the decision. He has to. The math is iron law. He calls the strike leader. His fighters are turning back. They don't have fuel to continue. The strike goes on without fighter escort. Later that day, the Lexington intelligence officers tally the results. 2 SBD Dauntless dive bombers lost to defending Zeros. One TBD Devastator torpedo plane shot down on approach. The crews did their jobs without the fighters because the fighters couldn't do theirs. The range problem isn't new. It's been the central limitation of carrier fighter operations since carriers began operating fighters. Commander John Thatch, CO of Fighting 3 aboard the Yorktown, writes report after report about it. The need for adequate fighter escort on every attack mission cannot be overemphasized, he types in one assessment. Without this support, our attack groups are completely at the mercy of Japanese fighters. The solution seems obvious: larger external fuel tanks. The Navy develops a 42-gallon centerline tank for the F4F4. Thatch's squadron tests it in early May 1942. It works. Sort of. The tank attaches to the belly of the aircraft just aft of the engine. That's also where you'd crash if you botched a landing. The placement makes pilots nervous. The tank adds range but destroys performance. The F4F4 is already heavier than the F4F3 due to folding wings and 2 extra guns. With a full drop tank, it wallows like a torpedo bomber. By summer 1942, Buer develops an alternative: 2 58-gallon tanks, one under each wing. Better weight distribution. Still adds 750 pounds to an already overloaded fighter. Lieutenant Bill Leonard tests them at Guadalcanal. His assessment is brutal. With its 2 wing tanks, the F4F4 was a dog, but it's better than not reaching the target. The doctrine evolves. Fighters escort strikes with external tanks attached. They fight with the tanks if forced to, jettisoning them only when absolutely necessary. Performance suffers, but range improves to maybe 250 miles. It's not enough. The Pacific Theater covers 1/4 of the Earth's surface. Islands are separated by hundreds of miles of open ocean. Targets lie beyond convenient range. Battles develop at distances the Wildcat can barely reach. And the Japanese know it. Their pilots learn to time their attacks. Hit the American escorts when they're at the far edge of their range. Force them to fight when their fuel is marginal. Watch them break off and run for home because they have to. Distance becomes a weapon. By late 1943, every American carrier pilot knows the drill. You can reach the target or you can fight. Rarely both. Never for long. The Pacific belongs to whoever can project power farther. And right now, that's Japan. January 1944. NAS Alameda, California. Lieutenant Commander Phil Torrey leads his newly formed VF-9 across the tarmac toward a line of brand new F6F Hellcats. They're gorgeous. Bigger than Wildcats, blue paint gleaming, propellers like scimitars. His pilots have been flying F4Fs for months. They know every quirk, every limitation, every compromise. They've read the intelligence reports about the Zero. They understand what they're up against. The Hellcat is supposed to change everything. Torrey climbs into the cockpit of the first F6F. The fuselage is wider than the Wildcats. The canopy sits higher. Visibility is outstanding. You can see over the nose, a revelation after the Wildcats' blocking cowling. He scans the instruments. Engine gauges, gun switches, fuel gauge. The fuel gauge reads 250 gallons when full. Torrey does the math in his head. The F4F3 carried 144 gallons internal. This carries 250. That's a 73% increase just in internal capacity. The chief plane captain leans into the cockpit. "Sir, she'll take a 150-gallon centerline tank. Drops clean when you want it gone. Total capacity 400 gallons. 400 gallons. Torrey has flown combat missions where he landed with less than 40 gallons remaining, where he calculated fuel consumption by the minute, monitoring every gauge, trimming for maximum efficiency, praying the numbers worked. 400 gallons means those calculations change completely. The XF6F1 first flew in June 1942, while the Battle of Midway still echoed in memory. Grumman's engineers, led by chief designer William Schwendler, built it in response to the Navy's demand for more range, more firepower, more protection than the Wildcat offered. The Bureau of Aeronautics had originally wanted an improved Wildcat. Grumman said no. The performance gains wouldn't justify the effort. Better to design a completely new fighter around the largest radial engine available, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. The R2800 generated 2,000 horsepower. That's 50% more than the Wildcat's R1830. It was also heavier and drank more fuel. But Grumman built the airframe large enough to accommodate massive fuel tanks. The design philosophy was simple. Range wins wars in the Pacific. You can have the best fighter in the world. If it can't reach the battle, it's worthless. The F6F entered service in January 1943. VF-9 was the first squadron to take it into combat, flying from the Essex in August 1943 during the Marcus Island raid. The first Hellcat kill came days later at the same target. Ensign assigned to VF-9 flamed a Japanese bomber. By June 1944, the Fast Carrier Task Force operates 9 fleet carriers and 6 light carriers. Nearly all embark Hellcat squadrons. Some carry 54 F6Fs. The light carriers deploy 24 each. That's over 500 Hellcats at sea, all carrying 400 gallons of fuel when fully loaded. The Japanese know the Hellcat exists. Their intelligence has captured photographs, performance data, technical specifications. They know it's faster than the Zero. Top speed 380 mph versus 330 for the Zero. They know it climbs well, dives better, and outguns everything Japan has. What they don't fully appreciate is the fuel capacity. Their estimates are low. They assume the Hellcat carries maybe 300 gallons maximum. They position their carriers accordingly, beyond 300 miles, where American fighters shouldn't be able to reach and fight effectively. The miscalculation is about to cost them everything. Torrey fires up the R2800. The engine catches with a bark that vibrates the entire airframe. He runs through the checklist, feeling the power available at his fingertips. 400 gallons of fuel, 650 caliber machine guns, 200 mile-per-hour cruise speed. Combat radius approaching 500 miles under the right conditions. The Pacific just got smaller, and the Japanese don't know it yet. June 19, 1944. 10:23 a.m. USS Lexington, 200 miles west of Saipan. The radar operator's voice cuts through the fighter direction center. Raid 1, bearing 265, range 140 miles, large raid, many. Commander Paul Bowie, leading VF-16, is already in the cockpit. His Hellcat carries a full load, 250 gallons internal, 150-gallon drop tank slung beneath the fuselage, 400 gallons total, enough for 4 hours of flight, maybe more if he's careful. The Japanese are coming. Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet launched 4 massive raids this morning. His carriers are positioned 300 miles from the American task force. He's confident at this distance his strike aircraft can reach the Americans. But American fighters can't effectively reach him, not with fuel to fight properly. The first raid consists of 69 aircraft, Zeke fighters, Judy dive bombers, Jill torpedo planes. They're detected at maximum radar range and closing fast. The Lexington launches Hellcats. So does the Essex, the Yorktown, the Hornet, the Enterprise. Every carrier in Task Force 58 spits fighters into the sky. Within minutes, 85 F6Fs are airborne, more launching every minute. The fighter direction officers vector them out. The Hellcats climb. Fuel burns at higher rates during climb, maybe 100 gallons per hour at full power. But they need altitude. The Japanese bombers will come in high, around 18,000 feet. Lieutenant J.G. Alex Vraciu leads his division from the Lexington. He's assigned Cap Station 50 miles west of the task force. That's where the interception should happen, far enough out that damaged Japanese planes won't reach the carriers. At 10:36 a.m., he spots them. A massive gaggle of aircraft at 18,000 feet. The sun glints off canopies. He counts quickly, too many to count, dozens, maybe 50 or more. The Japanese formation looks professional. Fighters high and outside, bombers in the middle, classic strike composition. Vraciu keys his radio. Lexington, this is Bald Eagle 7, tally-ho, many bandits, Angels 18, heading 090. He checks his fuel. He's been airborne 35 minutes, used maybe 50 gallons, that leaves 350 gallons, plenty. He rolls inverted and pulls into a dive, accelerating toward the Japanese bombers. His wingman follows. The rest of VF-16 engages from different angles. What happens next stuns the Japanese pilots. The American fighters are everywhere, not just a few. Not just for a quick pass before fleeing. Dozens of Hellcats at every altitude, aggressively attacking using energy tactics that require fuel reserves. The F6F slash through the formation. Vraciu fires his first burst at a Judy dive bomber. The Japanese plane explodes. He pulls up, reverses, dives on another. Another kill. He's not thinking about fuel conservation, he's fighting. 6 minutes later, Vraciu has shot down 6 Judy dive bombers. 6 confirmed kills in 1 engagement. He's not alone. Across the combat area, Hellcat pilots are racking up multiple kills. The Japanese cannot understand it. These American fighters should be worried about fuel. They should be hitting and running. Instead, they're dogfighting, making multiple passes, staying in the combat area for 30 minutes or more. Commander David McCampbell, Siege of the Essex, shoots down 7 Japanese aircraft this day, 5 Judy dive bombers and 2 Zeros. Between morning and afternoon engagements, he conducts an experiment. He wants to know if an F6F with its drop tank still attached can catch a Zero at low altitude. He's been told it can't. Too much drag. Zero too fast at sea level. He spots a lone Zero below him, pulls into a chase. The Zero pilot sees him coming and accelerates. McCampbell leaves his drop tank attached, 150 gallons of fuel hanging under his fuselage, creating drag. He catches the Zero anyway. The Hellcat closes the distance at low altitude. McCampbell gets into firing position. The Zero pilot, desperate, pulls into a climbing turn and reverses. McCampbell can't follow. The drop tank prevents that level of maneuverability. But he proved his point. An F6F with external tank can overhaul a Zero even at the Zero's optimal altitude. McCampbell jettisons his tank now. Immediately, the Hellcat handles better. He's lighter, more maneuverable. But he kept that tank until he absolutely needed to drop it. The fuel gave him options. Across Task Force 58, the story repeats. Japanese raids come in throughout the day. 4 major attacks. Nearly 400 Japanese aircraft launched. The Hellcats meet them all. Fuel is never an issue. The F6Fs have capacity to climb, intercept, fight, then orbit waiting for another raid. Some Hellcats log 4 hours of flight time. They land with reserves. The Japanese lose approximately 325 aircraft. The Americans lose 16 Hellcats in combat. Admiral Ozawa's calculations are in ruins. His mobile fleet is 200 to 300 miles from the Americans, supposedly safe distance. Instead, his air groups are massacred. By evening, he withdraws farther west, beyond 300 miles, beyond any practical strike range, or so he thinks. June 20th, 1944, 1:15 p.m., USS Lexington. Admiral Mark Mitcher stares at the plot board. A search team found Ozawa's mobile fleet this morning, but then lost contact. Multiple searches have been launched. Most come back empty. At 12:20, Commander Ernie Snowden led 12 VF-16 Hellcats on the longest carrier-based search mission to date. 475 miles northwest, 6 hours airborne. They reached the limit of practical range and turned back without finding the Japanese carriers. Now it's afternoon. The Japanese are getting away. At 15:40, an Avenger search team spots them. The contact report comes in garbled but clear enough. Japanese carriers located, bearing 280 degrees, distance 220 miles. Mitcher checks the math. strike aircraft can reach 220 miles. Barely. But there's a complication. The task force is steaming southeast, recovering aircraft. To launch the strike, they'll have to turn into the southeasterly wind, almost exactly opposite the bearing to the target. That adds miles, many miles, and the contact report has an error. The navigator made a 1-degree mistake. The actual distance to the Japanese fleet is 280 miles, not 220. Factor in the launch heading, the correction, the navigation error, and the strike will have to fly nearly 300 nautical miles to reach the target. That's beyond maximum range for armed strike aircraft. Way beyond for the torpedo, bombers. Even the fighters will be pushing their limits. And it's already afternoon. Sunset is at 1900. There's no way the strike can get there and back before dark. The returning aircraft will have to land at night, and most of the pilots aren't night qualified. Aircraft will go into the water. Lots of them, maybe half. Commander W.K. Giles, Mitcher's operations officer, lays it out clearly. We can get them there, but the chances of getting them all back are slim. Mitcher has 3 seconds to decide. Let Ozawa escape or launch and accept catastrophic losses. He issues the order to launch them. At 16:24, the first Hellcats roar off the deck. By 16:36, all 216 aircraft are airborne, 85 Hellcats, 77 dive bombers, 54 torpedo planes. The largest carrier strike of the war, heading into the unknown at maximum range. Every F6F carries a full load, 250 gallons internal, 150-gallon drop tank, 400 gallons. Some also carry 500-pound bombs under the wings. The pilots know the score. They heard the briefing. Nearly 300 miles to target. Return flight in darkness. Fuel will be critical, but this is the chance to destroy Japan's carrier fleet. This is why they're here. The strike force climbs slowly, conserving fuel. Lieutenant Commander Bill Dean leads VF-2 from the Hornet. 14 Hellcats, 10 carrying 500-pound semi-armor-piercing bombs. His briefing was simple. Escort the strike, hit the carriers, get home if you can. Ensign William Vaughn notices his artificial horizon isn't working, the instrument that tells you which way is up when you can't see the horizon. Essential for flying in weather or at night. He considers aborting. He launches anyway. The strike group passes 100 miles, then a 150. The Hellcat pilots monitor their fuel gauges. They're burning approximately 55 gallons per hour at cruise settings. That means 3 hours to get there, fight, and get back. Maybe. At 200 miles, some pilots start calculating whether they'll make it home. The math is brutal. 400 gallons at launch. 60 gallons used reaching 200 miles. That leaves 340. Another 90 miles to target will burn 83 gallons. Down to 257 gallons. Then combat, how much? 50 gallons? 100? Then 300 miles home at high fuel consumption because you're running for your life. Then landing pattern and reserve. The numbers barely work even under perfect conditions. At 250 miles, they can see the Japanese fleet on the horizon. The sun is low, casting long shadows across the ocean. It's 1840, just 20 minutes before sunset. Ozawa's carriers are turning into the wind, launching fighters. Approximately 75 Japanese aircraft scramble to intercept. The combat air patrol has been airborne for hours, waiting. They're fresh. The Americans have been flying for over 2 hours and are about to enter combat. The Japanese pilots cannot believe what they're seeing. American fighters here, this far from their carriers, after a 280-mile flight. With bombs, the Hellcats jettison their drop tanks. 150 gallons of empty aluminum tumbling into the ocean. But they've burned most of that fuel during the transit. The tanks were nearly empty anyway. Now the F6Fs are lighter, more maneuverable, and they still have enough fuel to fight. VF-2 engages first. Dean's pilots dive through a screen of Zeeks, heading for the bombers following behind. The dogfight develops fast and furious. Zeeks and Hellcats tumbling through the sky at sunset, tracers stitching the air, aircraft exploding. The Japanese pilots fight desperately. They're defending their carriers, their fleet, their comrades. But they're also confused. These American fighters are supposed to be out of fuel. They're supposed to be running for home. Instead, they're dogfighting, hard maneuvering, full throttle, making multiple passes. Fighting 10 engages the northern group of carriers. The Grim Reapers claim 7 confirmed kills. Commander William Kane leads the Enterprise strike and downs 3 Japanese aircraft himself, extending his total for the day to 4. Fighting 16 from the Lexington hits the middle group. Alex Vraciu finds himself boxed in by 8 Zeeks. He shoots down one trying to kill his wingman, then fights his way clear. Other VF-16 pilots claim multiple kills. The strike lasts 23 minutes. Bombs fall on carriers. Torpedoes run. The light carrier Hio takes multiple torpedo hits and sinks. The fleet carrier Zuikaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, Santa Cruz, takes bomb damage. But the Hellcats are the story. After a 280-mile flight carrying bombs, climbing to altitude, they fight a full-scale engagement against fresh Japanese interceptors. And they win. The fuel capacity makes it possible. The 400 gallons at launch, the efficient cruise out, the reserves that allow combat power settings for 20 minutes. For the Japanese, it's incomprehensible. Their best fighters, Zeeks that can dogfight anything, are being shot down by American fighters that shouldn't have enough fuel to be here at all. At 1903, the strike breaks off. The sun is below the horizon. Darkness is falling fast. The long flight home begins June 20th, 1944. 8:30 p.m., Philippine Sea. The strike force struggles home through complete darkness. No moon, scattered clouds. The sea below, an infinite black void. Lieutenant Commander Dean checks his fuel gauge. Maybe 70 gallons, maybe less. VF-2 has been airborne for 4.5 hours. The return flight covers 300 miles against a headwind. His pilots are scattered across the sky, some with other air groups, some alone. The Hellcats are in better shape than the bombers. The dive bombers and torpedo planes burn fuel faster, carry less. Many ditch short of the task force, out of fuel, pilots and crew hoping to be rescued at dawn, but even the Hellcats are running on fumes. At 20:45, Dean sees lights ahead. The task force. Admiral Mitcher made the decision to illuminate the ships despite the submarine danger. Every carrier has its flight deck lights on. Searchlights pointing up, truck lights burning. It's the most beautiful and terrifying sight Dean has ever seen. Beautiful because it means survival. Terrifying because the landing pattern is chaos. Aircraft circling at different altitudes. Some making approaches on destroyers by mistake. Others so low on fuel they're ditching alongside the ships. Dean makes his approach on a carrier, not the Hornet. He's too confused to tell which one. He just needs a deck, any deck. Wave off. The landing signal officer waves him off. Deck is fouled. Someone crashed in the barriers. Go around. Dean adds power, climbs, circles. He glances at his fuel gauge. It's bouncing between 40 and 50 gallons. That's maybe 20 minutes of flight time. Maybe less. He makes another approach. This time the LSO gives him a cut. Dean chops throttle. The Hellcat drops. Tailhook catches a wire. He's down. Safe. He climbs out of the cockpit, legs shaking. Only then does he realize he's on the Yorktown, not his own ship. He doesn't care. He's alive. Across the task force, the story repeats. Hellcats landing on wrong carriers. Pilots so exhausted they can barely taxi clear of the landing area. Some barrier crashes. Some ditchings just short of safety. Ensign Vaughn, the pilot who launched with no working artificial horizon, ditches his Hellcat in the ocean. He flew the entire mission without knowing which way was up except by looking outside. 4.5 hours, including night flight over open ocean. He survives. Lieutenant J.G.M.M. Tom of VF-1 lands on the Yorktown successfully. He's still sitting in his cockpit, too tired to climb out, when another Hellcat hits the deck hard, bounces, and crashes down on his aircraft. Tom dies in the impact. By midnight, the recovery is over. The task force tallies its losses. 100 aircraft lost, about half the strike force. But most losses are operational. Fuel exhaustion, night landing accidents, barrier crashes. Only 6 Hellcats were shot down in combat over the Japanese fleet. Another 14 lost to operational causes, night ditchings, deck crashes, fuel exhaustion. 20 Hellcat losses total out of 85 launched, a 23% loss rate. Compare that to the torpedo bombers, more than half lost. The dive bombers, nearly 40% lost. The Hellcats' fuel capacity saved lives. The F6Fs that made it back averaged 40 gallons remaining. That's 4 times what the Avengers had left. It's the difference between landing on a deck and ditching in the ocean. Lieutenant Alex Vraciu lands on the Enterprise instead of the Lexington. He doesn't care. He shot down 6 Japanese planes during the turkey shoot the previous day. He survived the mission beyond darkness. He has 40 gallons of fuel left when his wheels touch down. Years later, he'll name his youngest son Mark, after Admiral Mark Mitcher, who turned on the lights and brought them home. The statistics from June 20 tell the story of the Hellcats' capability. 216 aircraft launched, 85 Hellcats. Average distance flown 290 miles to target. Combat duration 23 minutes. Return flight 300 miles, much of it in darkness. Total time airborne 4.5 to 5 hours. The Hellcats fought a major engagement after flying farther than any carrier fighter had ever flown operationally. They did it carrying bombs. They did it with fuel to spare for combat. The Japanese tactical calculations, built on 3 years of experience, proved utterly wrong. American fighters could reach 300 miles and fight effectively. The Hellcats' 400-gallon fuel capacity made it possible, and the war just changed forever. July 1944. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. The after-action reports from the Philippine Sea battle pile up on staff tables. Survivor interviews, intelligence assessments, tactical analyses. The numbers are devastating. More than 600 Japanese aircraft destroyed in 3 days. 3 carriers sunk or damaged, 2/3 of the carrier air groups wiped out. But it's the fighter combat reports that cause the most concern. Japanese pilots report American fighters appearing at distances thought impossible, engaging in prolonged dogfights after long transits, operating with fuel reserves that shouldn't exist. 1-0 pilots' debriefing is typical. We intercepted American carrier planes attacking the mobile fleet. The target was 300 kilometers from the enemy carriers. We confirmed this by scout reports. The American fighters should have had no fuel for combat. Instead, they fought for more than 30 minutes. They made multiple passes. They pursued us when we tried to disengage. I do not understand how they had fuel for this. The intelligence section pulls together all available data on the F6F Hellcat. Performance specifications, captured documents, reconnaissance photos, combat reports. The revised estimate for F6F fuel capacity, 400 gallons with external tank. Someone does the math on a chalkboard, 400 gallons. R2800 engine consumption at cruise approximately 55 gallons per hour. That's 7.2 hours endurance. Figure 2 hours for combat operations, landing pattern, reserve. That leaves 5.2 hours for transit. At 200 knots cruise speed, that's 1,040 nautical miles total range. Combat radius 5 on 20 nautical miles. The number sits on the board like an accusation. Japanese carrier doctrine assumed American fighters effective to 250 miles, marginal to 300 miles, and non-existent beyond that. The calculations that governed fleet positioning, strike planning, and defensive operations were based on those assumptions. All wrong. Vice Admiral Ozawa reads the revised intelligence assessment. He's lost 3 carriers in 3 days. His air groups are gutted. And now he learns the Americans can project fighter power more than 500 miles from their carriers. There is no safe distance anymore. The strategic implications cascade through the planning, cells. If American fighters can reach 500 miles, then Japanese carriers must operate beyond that range to avoid interception. But Japanese strike aircraft, torpedo bombers and dive bombers have practical ranges of 450 to 500 miles. If the carriers pull back to 550 miles, their own strikes can barely reach American task forces. The equation doesn't balance anymore, and it gets worse. The Americans have 15 fleet carriers now, Essex-class ships, each carrying up to 90 aircraft. They have 9 light carriers. That's 24 carriers total, with nearly 2,000 aircraft embarked. At least 500 are Hellcats. 500 fighters, each with 500-mile combat radius, operating from mobile platforms that can appear anywhere in the Pacific. Japan has 6 operational fleet carriers left after the Philippine Sea. 2 are damaged. The remaining 4 can embark perhaps 250 aircraft total, and there aren't enough trained pilots to fill even those slots. The numbers tell a story of imminent defeat. Commander Fuchida Mitsuo, the operations officer who calculated American fighter ranges 6 months ago, updates his estimates. His conclusions are grim. American fighters can escort strikes to any target within 500 miles. They arrive with fuel reserves sufficient for 30 to 45 minutes of combat. They can pursue fleeing aircraft. They can orbit and wait for additional targets. They have options Japanese fighters no longer have. Japanese carriers can no longer use distance as a defensive measure. Positioning the mobile fleet 300 miles from American carriers doesn't provide safety. It just means Japanese strike aircraft fly 300 miles into a wall of Hellcats that have fuel to fight. The tactical doctrine must change. But change to what? Pull back beyond 500 miles? Then Japanese strikes cannot reach American ships effectively. Close to within 200 miles and rely on superior fighter skills? Japanese pilot quality has collapsed since 1942. The veterans are dead. The replacements have minimal training. Avoid carrier battles entirely, that cedes control of the Pacific to the Americans. There are no good options. The Hellcats' fuel capacity eliminated them all. October 14, 1944. USS Hornet, South China Sea. Lieutenant Commander Fred Bardsher leads 2 divisions of VF-27 on a fighter sweep over Formosa. The target, Takao Airfield, lies 350 miles from the task force. They're loaded for a long mission. Full internal fuel, drop tanks. That's 400 gallons per aircraft. The strike group crosses the coast at dawn. The island rises from the sea, mountainous and green. Takao sits on the southwest coast. Intelligence reports heavy Japanese air strength, maybe 500 aircraft across Formosa's air bases. VF-27's job: suppress enemy fighters, clear the air. Make sure the dive bombers and torpedo planes can hit their targets without interference. At 06:30, they arrive over Takao. The airfield is active, aircraft parked in revetments, some taxiing, several in the air just taking off. Bardsher splits his formation. One division attacks the airfield. The other maintains high cover for enemy fighters. The attack develops fast. Hellcats diving on parked aircraft, guns hammering. Flames erupt from fuel trucks. A hangar explodes. Japanese pilots sprint for their fighters, trying to get airborne. Some make it. Zeeks and Tonys, new army fighters, claw into the sky to intercept. The dogfight rages for 25 minutes. Bardsher shoots down 3 aircraft himself. His pilots claim 10 more. One Hellcat goes down to anti-aircraft fire. The pilot, Commander Fred Schrader, the air group commander, crashes from low altitude. No parachute observed. The survivors regroup and head home. They've been airborne for 3.5 hours when they land back on the Hornet. Most have 60 to 80 gallons remaining. The mission profile would have been impossible in Wildcats. 350 miles to target combat, 350 miles home. That's 700 miles total distance plus combat fuel. The F4F couldn't do it. The F6F does it routinely. 3 days later, VF-27 flies another long-range mission. Same distance, more combat. They return safely. The pattern repeats across Task Force 38 throughout October 1944. Hellcats flying 300 to 400 miles to targets in the Philippines, strafing airfields, escorting strikes, dogfighting, then flying home. On October 12th, Commander Ralph Scheifele leads Bunker Hill's Air Group 8 against Japanese carriers near Formosa. His F6F photo reconnaissance plane orbits the battle area for 30 minutes, coordinating attacks. He spots Zeeks trying to intercept the strike and shoots down 2 himself. Then he outrunning 3 Zeeks on his tail, even though his Hellcat is laden with camera equipment. Total time airborne, 4.2 hours, no fuel concerns. On October 24th, Fighting 27 intercepts a formation of 16 Fran torpedo bombers approaching the task force. Lieutenant Commander Bardshar leads the attack. His squadron splashes 13 of the 16. The survivors jettison their torpedoes and flee. The engagement happens 80 miles from the carriers. The Hellcats pursue the fleeing Japanese aircraft for another 40 miles before breaking off. Total distance from Task Force 38, 120 miles. That's beyond the range where Wildcats would have disengaged due to fuel concerns. The extra 150 gallons from the drop tank makes these pursuits possible. Japanese pilots learn they cannot outrun Hellcats. Distance no longer provides escape. October 25th, Cape Engano. Task Force 38 locates the Japanese carrier force, the decoy group trying to lure Admiral Halsey's fleet away from Leyte Gulf. The carriers are 150 miles north. 6 strikes are launched throughout the day. More than 200 Hellcat sorties. The F6Fs escort the bombers, suppress Japanese fighters, and drop their own bombs on enemy ships. All 4 Japanese carriers are sunk: Chitose, Chiyoda, Zuikaku, Zuiho. The last carrier veterans of Pearl Harbor go down under waves of American bombs. The Hellcats operate continuously for 8 hours. Some pilots fly 3 missions. They never worry about fuel. The 400-gallon capacity provides options: security, freedom to fight without constantly checking gauges. By November, Hellcat squadrons have perfected long-range operations. Pilots know exactly how to manage fuel. They understand the trade-offs between altitude, speed, and endurance. They can calculate down to the minute how long they can stay in a combat area and still make it home. The techniques become doctrine. Climb slowly to altitude, conserving fuel during the high consumption phase. Cruise at 200 knots indicated airspeed. Mixture lean to 55 gallons per hour consumption. Use drop tank fuel first, keeping internal tanks full as reserve. Jettison drop tanks before combat. Empty tanks create drag. Fight efficiently. Short bursts, good gunnery, don't waste ammunition or fuel. Return at economical cruise settings, accepting slower speed for better range. Maintain reserves, 40 gallons minimum for landing pattern and emergencies. These procedures turn the Hellcat into a strategic weapon. The fighter that can reach any target within 500 miles and fight effectively once it gets there. Japanese forces within that radius are vulnerable. Carriers, air bases, shipping, surface combatants. Nothing is safe from carrier-based fighters anymore. The Pacific Ocean, 1/4 of Earth's surface, is now dominated by a fighter that can fly 1,000 miles total distance and still dogfight. The Japanese never adapted. They couldn't. Their fighters lacked the fuel capacity. The Zero carried 224 gallons with drop tank. Good range, but not enough reserve for extended combat after long transits. The newer fighters, Jack, George, Frank, were faster but had similar or shorter range. Japan built tactics around the assumption that distance provided security. The Hellcat invalidated that assumption, and Japan had no answer. April 1945. Okinawa. Task Force 58 operates continuously off Okinawa for 2 months. The carriers steam in a 60-square-mile area tied to the invasion beaches supporting ground troops. They can't maneuver freely. They're static targets for Japanese kamikazes launching from Kyushu, only 350 miles north. The Hellcats fly continuous combat air patrols. 4 divisions aloft at all times, stacked at different altitudes from 5,000 to 25,000 feet, ready to intercept raids coming from any direction. On April 6, the Japanese launched Kikusui No. 1, the first of 10 massive kamikaze attacks. More than 350 aircraft, mostly kamikazes, heading for the American fleet. The combat air patrol intercepts them at ranges up to 80 miles from the task force. The Hellcats pursue individual kamikazes across hundreds of square miles of ocean. They chase, shoot down, chase again. Some F6F pilots log kills at ranges 100 miles from their carriers. The fuel capacity makes it possible. A Hellcat can orbit on station for 2 hours, intercept a raid 80 miles out, dogfight for 20 minutes and still have fuel to return and land. Wildcats couldn't do that, but Hellcats can. Throughout the Okinawa campaign, the pattern repeats. Japanese raids intercepted far from the fleet. Hellcats chasing kamikazes until they splash or escape. Hours of cap time without fuel concerns. The Japanese throw everything at the American fleet, kamikazes, conventional bombers, Oka rocket bombs. Nothing works. The Hellcat barrier is too thick, too persistent. Some kamikazes get through. Ships are hit. Men die. But the overwhelming majority of Japanese aircraft are destroyed before reaching their targets. The Hellcats account for most of those kills. The fuel advantage translates directly to defensive capability. More time on station means better coverage. Better coverage means more interceptions. More interceptions mean fewer ships hit. By May, Japanese air strength around Okinawa is exhausted. The kamikazes keep coming, but in smaller numbers. The Hellcats maintain their barrier. The mathematics of attrition favors the side that can keep fighters airborne longer. The strategic calculus is brutal. Japan needs to destroy American carriers to stop the invasion. To destroy carriers, they need to hit them with kamikazes or bombs. To hit them, they need to penetrate the fighter screen. But the fighter screen extends 100 miles from the carriers, and it's maintained by fighters that can stay aloft for 4 hours or more. The probability of any single Japanese aircraft penetrating that screen is low. Very low. Japan loses approximately 7,800 aircraft at Okinawa, combat losses and operational accidents combined. The Hellcats claim 628 confirmed kills. The true number is likely higher. Some Japanese aircraft were damaged and crashed trying to return to base. The fuel capacity didn't just enable offensive operations, it made defense possible at ranges that protected the fleet. By June 1945, the Strategic Bombing Survey interviews captured Japanese pilots and commanders. One question appears repeatedly. Why didn't you intercept American strikes more effectively? The answers vary, but a common theme emerges. The American fighters appeared everywhere, at ranges thought impossible, with fuel reserves that allowed sustained combat. Japanese fighters couldn't match that endurance. They fought until their fuel ran low, then had to disengage or die. One captured Japanese naval aviator summarizes it simply. We calculated based on fighter ranges we understood. The Americans changed the calculation. We never adapted. The technology gap was real, but it wasn't just about speed or firepower or maneuverability. It was about fuel. The unglamorous essential resource that determines whether a fighter can reach the battle and fight effectively once it gets there. The Hellcat carried 400 gallons, that's a 179% of the Zero's capacity without drop tanks. It's a 179% of the F4F Wildcat's capacity. That extra fuel bought time to climb, time to cruise. Time to fight, time to return safely. Japan never fielded a carrier fighter with comparable fuel capacity during the war. They tried. Several designs were proposed with larger internal tanks. None entered service before the war ended. By August 1945, Japan's carrier fleet is effectively destroyed. The remaining carriers hide in ports with no aircraft to fly from them, no pilots to fly those aircraft, and no fuel to train new pilots. The American carriers operate within 200 miles of the Japanese home islands. Hellcats fly strikes against airfields, factories, and shipping. They fly combat air patrol over the fleet. They escort B-29 missions. They do everything carrier fighters are supposed to do at ranges that would have been impossible 3 years earlier. The strategic impact of the Hellcat's fuel capacity cannot be overstated. It changed the geographic scope of carrier operations. It extended the reach of American naval power by hundreds of miles. It made Japanese carriers vulnerable at distances they thought safe. Distance was supposed to be Japan's advantage. The vast Pacific Ocean protected their empire. American forces had to cross thousands of miles to reach Japanese-controlled territory. But the Hellcat shrank the Pacific. 500-mile combat radius meant American carriers could strike targets across the entire theater. Island bases fell within range. Shipping lanes became hunting grounds. No Japanese naval force could operate within 500 miles of American carriers without expecting sustained fighter attack. The mathematics of defeat were written in fuel capacity measurements. 400 gallons versus 224 gallons. The difference determined who controlled the air. And controlling the air determined who won the war. August 15, 1945. 5:45 a.m. USS Ticonderoga, 200 miles southeast of Tokyo. Lieutenant Commander Charles Gunnels leads 12 Hellcats of VBF 87 toward the Chiba Peninsula. Each F6F carries a 500-pound bomb and a full drop tank. 400 gallons of fuel. Enough for 3 hours of flight, more if needed. The mission briefing was routine. Strike military targets on the peninsula, specifically an airfield, a gunnery school, and an industrial plant. Standard fighter bomber work. The Hellcats have flown missions like this for weeks. What isn't routine? The weather. Heavy overcast obscures their primary target. Gunnels searches for an opening in the clouds. At Oro 600, he finds a hole. Below, through the break, he spots Choshi Airfield, the secondary target. Good enough. He assigns targets by division. First Division takes the airfield. Second Division hits the gunnery school. Third Division targets the industrial plant. The Hellcats roll into their dives. Gunnels releases his bomb at 4,000 feet, pulls out at 1,500 feet. His bomb impacts the airfield. Secondary explosions ripple across the target, probably ammunition or fuel storage. He pulls up, climbing back through the overcast when the radio crackles. All strike-able. Aircraft, this is nitrate base. All strike-able aircraft, return to base immediately. Do not attack your targets. The war is over. Gunnels is already pulling out of his dive. But below him, 11 other Hellcats are committed to their bombing runs. They can't hear the message or can't react in time. The bombs fall. Explosions erupt across all 3 targets. Lieutenant Junior Grade John McNabb, flying tail end Charlie as the 12th man in the formation, releases his 500-pounder at 0608. It impacts the industrial plant. Probably the last American bomb dropped in World War II. The Hellcats regroup above the overcast and turn for home. The war is over. They just didn't know it in time to abort. But the mission isn't over. Not yet. Lieutenant Howard Harrison leads a fighter-bomber sweep, 12 Hellcats from VF-88 and 24 Corsairs from other squadrons. They're over Tokurazama airfield when the ceasefire order goes out. Harrison never receives it. His radio is malfunctioning. What he does receive is very clear. 17 Japanese fighters bouncing his formation from above and behind. A mixed group, Jacks, Franks, George, and Zeeks. The Japanese pilots either didn't receive their own ceasefire order or chose to ignore it. They attack aggressively. 4 Japanese aircraft go down in the first pass. Then the formations shred in a head-on engagement. The dogfight rages for 15 minutes, after the war officially ended, after Japan agreed to surrender, after the bombs stopped falling. But nobody told these pilots, or they didn't care. They fight because that's what fighter pilots do. Lieutenant Junior Grade T.W. Hansen shoots down 2 Franks. His section leader claims 3 more. They're trying to protect a damaged Hellcat limping toward the coast when more Japanese fighters attack. The fuel calculations never entered their minds. After the flight from the carrier, after the fight, the Hellcats still have reserves. They maneuver, they pursue, they fight. By 06:30, the last Japanese fighter disengages. The surviving Hellcats turn for home. Behind them, Japan's airfields smolder. The war is over, though it took a final dogfight to prove it. VF-88 returns to the Yorktown. Every aircraft recovers safely, though several are shot full of holes. They've been airborne for 3.5 hours. They're landing with 40 to 60 gallons remaining, exactly the reserves they planned for. Even on the last day of the war, the Hellcats' fuel capacity provided the margin of survival. The final statistics tell the story. The F6F Hellcat flew in combat from August 1943 to August 1945, 24 months. U.S. Navy and Marine Corps Hellcats were credited with 5,156 Japanese aircraft destroyed. British Hellcats added 52 more. Total 5,208 confirmed kills. American Hellcat losses in air combat, approximately 270 aircraft. Kill ratio 19.3 to 1. No other fighter in World War II matched that ratio. Not the P-51 Mustang, not the Spitfire, not the FW-190, none came close. The reasons for the Hellcat's success are complex. Superior pilot training, excellent tactics, radar direction, numerical superiority all contributed. But one factor enabled everything else: fuel capacity. 400 gallons meant Hellcats could escort strikes to maximum range. They could maintain combat air patrol for hours. They could chase fleeing enemies beyond visual range from their carriers. They could dogfight after long transits. They could make mistakes, navigational errors, wrong turns, extended searches, and still have fuel to recover. The Japanese built their defensive doctrine on the assumption that American fighters were range-limited like their own. Stay beyond 250 miles and you're safe. The Hellcat made that assumption obsolete. By carrying 400 gallons, 250 internal, 150 in a drop tank, the F6F extended the reach of American naval power by 200 miles beyond what Japan expected. That doesn't sound like much. 200 miles in an ocean covering 64 million square miles, but those 200 miles made all the difference. Japanese carriers that thought themselves beyond fighter range found Hellcats overhead. Japanese air bases positioned just out of reach found themselves under attack. Japanese shipping routes calculated as safe were suddenly hunting grounds for long-range fighters. The Pacific Ocean shrank. And as it shrank, Japan's strategic options evaporated. The drop tank, that unglamorous cylinder of aluminum slung under the Hellcat's belly, changed the mathematics of naval warfare. It was the technology that enabled the tactics that won the air war in the Pacific. Japanese pilots never expected American fighters to fly 500 miles, drop bombs, dogfight for 30 minutes, and fly home. The math said it was impossible. But the Grumman F6F Hellcat proved otherwise, 400 gallons at a time. The war ended because of many factors: American industrial capacity, superior logistics, strategic bombing, submarine warfare, atomic weapons. But in the air over the Pacific, the deciding factor was often simpler. The Americans had more fuel, and fuel meant reach. Reach meant control. Control meant victory. The Japanese pilots who survived the war understood this. In post-war interviews, many mentioned the American fighters' apparent unlimited endurance. The Hellcats that appeared at impossible ranges. The combat air patrols that never seemed to leave their stations. The pursuit aircraft that chased them until they ran out of fuel and crashed. One veteran Japanese pilot summarized it in a phrase: "We calculated they would leave. They never left. They always had fuel." That's the story of the drop tank. The tactical advantage Japan never expected. The strategic capability that redefined carrier warfare. The difference between victory and defeat, measured in gallons of 100-octane aviation fuel. 400 gallons, 500 miles, 20 months of combat, and 5,208 Japanese aircraft that never made it home. The Hellcat didn't just win the air war. It changed what was possible, and Japan never adapted in time.